Welcome, everyone, to this briefing brought to you by the Israel Defense and Security Forum, IDSF. It is a great pleasure to be joined today by Yissachar, the head of the David Institute, which, of course, was established by IDSF. Or it's great to have you here today.
Thank you for having me, Moshe. It's great to be with you.
Or our viewers are always asking to bring you back on the briefing, so it's great to have you here. And there's just so much going on. Let's just jump right in. As we know,
Mhm.
Vice President JD Vance is in Israel right now. Is he here to preserve the peace? Is he here to hold back Israel from destroying Hamas? What do you think?
Well, I think he's mostly here to reaffirm the amazing achievement that the US has obtained in the region. And I have to say, this attests precisely to the way the Trump administration, JD Vance, the Vice President JD Vance included, which is that Gaza is merely one piece of the Middle East puzzle. That's how they see it. They see basically Gaza as a distraction, as a sort of a local issue that needs to be dealt with between Israel and Gaza. The sooner you close it up, the better. And the recognition is that that's exactly what Vice President Vance said just a while ago. That basically they recognize how this will contribute to more stability in the region by closing up the whole Gaza story, basically putting it to rest. But it does not infer that the Gaza story, the Middle East story, starts and ends in Gaza. If you listen to Trump, every time he talks, he refers to Gaza as this is a much larger story than Gaza. He mentioned Iran. He mentioned the expansion of the Abraham Accords. And if Trump works on his legacy, and he's been doing it ever since, even before coming into office, and since he got elected, I think a big part of his legacy is securing those peace accords between Israel and the Arab world. The 2020 Abraham Accords were a major signature achievement of the Trump administration. JD Vance recognizes it, and while he is considered to be more isolationist than others, we can talk about that. He certainly is a true friend of Israel, and he sees Israel, I think, in a very utilitarian way. I have to say, a very makes sense in today's political landscape in Washington. I would say that Trump has a more instinctive support of Israel as a value-based partnership, while JD Vance is asking himself, what value does Israel give to me as an American? And I think it's a fair question. And the goal of the experiment here, JD Vance, I believe, is the first visit to Israel since getting elected. He was here a few years ago, I believe 2 years ago, as a senator. He's a true friend of Israel. He likes us. That's at least the impression that we have. But mostly what he sees in us is a stabilizing force in the region. There is nothing that JD Vance or any American official, for that matter, would like more to have than more stability in the region, ergo more peace accords, ergo more trade routes and interconnectivity and peace. Because in the end, if you let the United States be a little bit more, acting in its own ecosphere and less involved overseas, nothing will make him happier.
Now, or let me ask you, yesterday I had General Avivi on the briefing, and he suggested that Hamas knows where the hostage bodies are and that this is a manipulation. This is part of their game. Do you think the vice president's presence here is to really push Hamas to continue doing what they agreed to and kind of creating this task force to just get this round completed?
Look, I mean, I'm gonna say my own opinion. There is very little chance that Hamas disarms of its own goodwill, and therefore, and JD Vance recognizes it. Some things, in my opinion, need to be let to fail. When you come to your boss, and I'm sure many of you have done that, and you say, let's do this great idea. And your boss, instead of just explaining to you all the different ways it's not going to work, he just tells you, sure, go ahead. And then a month later, you come back, with your tail between your legs, and you say, well, I didn't succeed. And then basically what he says, oh, well, that's a bad thing. But the good thing we tried, right? Instead of just telling you in advance that it's not going to work. In my opinion, that's a little bit what's going to happen in Gaza. The ISF, the International Stabilization Force, would include Turkey, Qatar, Egypt, all sorts of, perhaps even Azerbaijan. This particular part I welcome, and other Arab or Muslim forces that would eventually disarm Hamas and locate the hostages. I personally don't see that happening. I may be wrong about that, but no one can disarm Hamas other than Israel. If you ask me, what are the chances that the U.S. puts troops on the ground in order to make that happen? I would not say the chances are close to zero. They are zero. There is no chance that the United States sends troops, boots on the ground in Gaza. Again, I may be wrong about that, but I just don't see that happen in the current ambiance, in the current atmosphere. And there is no expectation, at least not on the Israeli side, that the U.S. does such a thing. We know how to handle Hamas best, and if any and all partners of the United States around the world ask for boots on the ground, be it South Korea, well, boots on the destroyer or the naval ship, be it Eastern Europe or elsewhere. Israel has never sought such a thing. The IDF can handle, and Netanyahu said it in Congress. I mean, we don't need U.S. boots on the ground. We defend ourselves. But the U.S.-Israel alliance, which I'm sure we'll discuss more in detail, is what matters to Israel. Now, I believe that Americans today see Israel more and more as something of an added value rather than a burden. Israel is a great asset to the United States, strategic asset, and it's a great stabilizing force in the region. And as it relates to JD Vance and his visit now, there are talks on a possible visit by the Vice President to Gaza, something that we should wait and see if that actually happens. But again, if you listen to the fascinating 60-minute interview of Jared Kushner to Steve Witkoff, and if you haven't watched it, I strongly recommend you will. That's what they're basically saying. Look, I mean, the ISF is supposed to be disarming Hamas. Right now, we were focused on making phase one a success, which is bringing back all the living hostages and successfully withdrawing the IDF to 53% of the Gaza Strip. Let's work on the next phases now. They don't really say, definitely it's going to be a success, definitely a Palestinian state in the end of the road. They specifically said, I mean, each side sees statehood or self-determination in a different way. Let's see what happens. Between the lines, I read that we wanted to secure the release of the hostages first. Now we're focused on trying to see what prescription works best in Gaza.
Okay, or so explain something to me. Israel and Hamas strike a deal. Hamas is now breaking that deal. And part of those negotiations were Turkey, Qatar, and Egypt. And now that the deal is breaking down, Hamas is breaking the deal. There's pressure on Israel not to take things out of proportion. What about Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey? You know, they got some good things out of this deal, but yet now the focus is on will Israel escalate? Well, what about those other countries?
Absolutely. I mean, these countries don't need to escalate as well. And I'm reminding you that when Israel attacked in Qatar, you and I talked about it last month when the Qatar strike happened. And we were both a bit amused, if you remember, Moshe, about the fact that, well, Israel violated Qatar's sovereignty and attacked on Qatari soil. Let me just remind all of our listeners that Qatar has been violating Israel's sovereignty for years now. It is just a fact of life that Israelis just got used to, like the skies above their heads, that every day there's either attempts to launch rockets or send out suicide bombers or fund Hamas or all these things that happen, or a Houthi missile or any and all thing, or I mean, to foil the terrorist attack in Judea and Samaria. All these things are part of Israeli life and Israeli reality. We just don't pay too much attention to this. And Qatar, in part, has been behind these attempts. I'm not saying that Qatar necessarily likes terrorism, but they like to be meddling and they like to be involved. For this precise reason, they've embarked on, I think, the largest soft influence campaign in history, with the billions that they are pouring on American universities and American culture institutions, be it Harvard, or Yale, and the NBA, or Hollywood, or anywhere. So I think the Qatari problem, we're a little bit split about it between Israel and the United States. I think here there is a little bit of a daylight in the way we see Qatar. The US sees Qatar as a viable ally. Israel is extremely suspicious of Qatar. But if you listen to the Witkoff-Kushner interview, they saw how Israeli representatives and Qatari representatives were hugging in Doha in Sharm el-Sheikh after this accord was concluded. And they say, I wish all the world saw it, how Israelis and Qataris are hugging and sharing this moment. I believe he meant Nitzan Alon, the representative, and the Qatari representatives. So definitely these countries, Turkey, led by Erdogan, who has basically called Netanyahu Hitler and compared Israel to Nazi Germany and accused Israel of everything from genocide to starvation and threatened himself to invade Gaza with a flotilla. So far, Turkey has been funding these flotillas, and now Erdogan has threatened to come himself or even send the Turkish Navy to accompany the flotilla. But just briefly, you mentioned the breaking of the ceasefire, and Israel definitely sees this as a watershed moment where the deal is tested. Hamas has attacked 2014 style an IDF force inside Gaza while the ceasefire is in place. I'm reminding you in 2014, when the 53-day Israeli operation in Gaza came to a ceasefire, Hamas violated it, emerged from a tunnel. There were explosions around, and then Hadar Golden was kidnapped, and two other combatants were killed. So there was a kidnapping attempt right now as well. Unfortunately, two IDF soldiers, a soldier and an officer, were killed with terrorists emerging from a nearby tunnel. So the IDF has struck over 150 targets in Gaza, 150 targets. But it is my understanding that a political echelon, meaning Netanyahu and his cabinet, sort of restrained them and said, okay, we were sort of put it in a box. We'll set up, put a, we'll right now we'll give the ceasefire a chance, and we'll see what happens. But Israel feels compelled to react and retaliate whenever such thing happens.
Or I want to ask you about Iran, which is certainly one of your expertise. Before we do that, something from our viewers, there's been a lot of discussion and analysis about looking at the current division of Gaza and potentially comparing it to an East Germany, West Germany situation, where for 40 some years, you had that division. 40 years is a long time. Do you think that given the security constraints and just the geography and the nature of Gazans, there's a long-term viability to having this split as it is right now in Gaza, or really comparing it to East-West Germany is not accurate?
I wouldn't see this accurate. East-West Germany, they have a long history, long shared history. Of course, they were the same country. And there were sort of a host, a myriad of principalities and free cities and local autonomies that reunited to Germany in late 19th century. And so the idea that East-West Germany is a little bit, I don't know if it's comparing likes with likes, but the idea here, I believe, is for Israel to give the ceasefire a chance. The idea of still controlling over half of Gaza. And it is only a matter of decision and a green light from the White House for that to become 100%. And so I do believe that Hamas feels with its back against the wall. Basically, if you remember the Cairo Agreement of 1994, or 95, when basically President Mubarak sort of sweared at PLO chairman Yasser Arafat, say, sign the document, sign the darn document, right? And he did. Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey did the same thing to Hamas right now. They felt absolutely with their backs against the wall. And so I would call it a split East-West Germany style. And I would compare it to a little bit what happened with Japan after World War II, when the United States really dictated the terms, and it gave a chance for a transitional government in place.
Okay, let's switch gears. Iran is
Mm.
brewing in the background as always. They didn't just fold and give up and become a peace-loving nation, unfortunately. And most recently, the supreme leader has pushed off any interest in negotiating with the U.S. and is doubling down on their missile production and their nuclear program. What can you share with us about Iran right now?
Absolutely. You mentioned the supreme leader. I'm reminding you that the supreme leader of Iran recently said that if the United States thinks we're going to denuclearize, and they need to go to a doctor, because that's not going to happen. Basically, that's what he was saying. Um, and I think it's extremely alarming because there are increasing reports about Iran reconstructing its military sites and in its nuclear sites. Now, if Iran is reconstructing its capabilities, that means that Israel should weigh in once again, and there are all sorts of reports about this reconstructing of nuclear sites in Isfahan, in Fordo, and elsewhere, and Natanz, of course. Now, Iran does not seem to be backing down. I'm reminding you that last week there was 10 years to the 2015 nuclear deal between the United States and Iran. Basically, it was an international agreement with Europe, China, Russia, but everybody understands it was basically an American-Iranian agreement with an international under international auspices, and all of the limitations under the provisions of this agreement have been removed, except very few that will be removed in 2030. But we all understand that the vast majority of provisions have been lifted, and Iran, as Foreign Minister Arakchi said last week, does not see itself bound by them anymore. Now, earlier this month, we marked 100 days to the Israel-Iran war, what was the 12-day war, as President Trump loves saying. And it seems that they were shocked, I have to tell you. They were shocked by Israel's capabilities. And to be honest, it is my view that this 12-day war has also helped paving the path to the current ceasefire in Gaza, because Hamas had practically no allies left. The Qataris saw how Israel gave them a taste of what it's capable of doing by striking in Doha, even if the attack failed in the sense that it failed to kill the Hamas leadership. But Israel is capable of doing much more than that, as it proved in Iran's case. And the Qataris were looking at Iran and asking themselves, if Israel is capable of doing that to a perceived regional superpower like Iran within 12 days, basically with no retaliation, Iran has been launching missiles that wreaked havoc in Israel. And the population was, close to alarmed, let's put it this way. I don't think we're stressed, but we're extremely alarmed. But still, a handful of missiles managed to penetrate the Arrow and other interception mechanisms and its defense systems. And Israel basically, as President Trump loves saying, knocked the hell out of Iran. Okay, the Qataris saw that, and they realized that it is time to make a deal before they taste an even more bitter medicine of Israel's making. And so, it is my view that Iran is a major threat. Netanyahu said it just yesterday. It is not going away. And the Mossad, the head of Mossad, David Barnea, said right after the 12-day war, we're going to keep, our seven eyes open in Iran, as we say in Hebrew. We're going to keep an eye out, or even seven eyes out in Iran in order to make sure it does not reconstruct. And this, I believe, remains an extremely central challenge to the Middle East right now.
And just a small question, how concerning do you think it is, this brewing alliance between Iran, China, and Russia? Is that the new front of the threat coming from Iran right now?
It's been going on for a while, and I've been talking about it for a while now, and we've all been talking about it in IDSF and David Institute. And Iran is the weakest link out of the three. And so Russia and China obviously cannot be directly attacked by the United States, but you can attack Iran, and sort of you can reaffirm your military capability by doing so, and you muscle up and toward Russia and China. I believe the 12-day war also reaffirmed the U.S. position globally, not just in the Middle East, and just perhaps, brought ceasefire in Ukraine closer together, managing to deter Russia, deter China. But it's true that these three have formed an unholy alliance. China has been buying practically all of Iran's oil, over 90%. And if you think about it, 90% of the oil means that China controls almost 90% of the Iranian economy. Basically, the Iranian economy is oil, is exporting oil. And if Xi Jinping decides to pull the plug, the Iranian economy collapses. And they know that full well. Russia has boosted by several dozen percentage points its oil purchase from Iran in order to help it out. China, on its part, has been buying more oil and gas from Russia in order to help it out with Ukraine. And there is an area of interest here. You saw last month in Beijing how all of these leaders come together. The Iranian president was there, and of course, Vladimir Putin was there walking next to Xi. So they have an interest to reaffirm each other as a counter to the American hegemony. They see themselves as challengers to the United States. Let me tell you that I am judging by the performance of the Russian military in Ukraine and the fact that China has never been tested in the battlefield, at least in the past 80 years, and the fact the United States is still the world's largest superpower by far, there's nothing like it, nothing even close. So I do believe they are, testing their capabilities. It is certainly smart for Israel, and it would be smart to further disengage itself from Russia and China, not completely cut ties, of course, but to sort of moderate its ties with Russia and China so long as the United States wishes it, because it is increasingly becoming difficult for any country to be friends both with the US and with China or with Russia. India is managing to do that. Not many countries have the capability to do that. And if there comes a time where the United States explicitly demands you choose between Washington and Beijing, I believe we all know the answer to that.
Where I'm always looking for kind of world events that trigger different reactions, certainly here in the Middle East. And we know the most obvious when the Hezbollah was kind of taken off the map, that kind of set the stage for Iran to also become in the targets of Israel. And I'm wondering, as things are now kind of brewing with the Russia-Ukraine peace or ceasefire, if Russia ends its war with Ukraine, does that then free it up to invest in Iran? Meaning, is that another point of demarcation where Israel has to say, wow, things are going to change rapidly if Russia can now reorient itself with its allies?
It's certainly a possibility, and we need to get prepared for this. I mean, frankly, it would stopping the war with Ukraine would probably free up Russia to start planning its next invasions, perhaps to Transnistria and Moldova, perhaps to Belarus and annex it all together, even though it's a friendly satellite state, perhaps reaffirming its stance in Azerbaijan, in Georgia, and elsewhere. So Russia does not show any sign that it's intending to stop. But but to be honest, I mean, the Russia-Iran alliance is something that I've been writing about increasingly recently because it's concerning. It's a shared concern for Israel and Europe. In that sense, Europe would be wiser not to keep bashing Israel as a national sport and start seeing the intersecting interests between Israel and Europe. I mean, we have a lot of shared interests, okay, a lot of common threats. Russia, for example, has been launching hundreds of drones, sometimes hundreds of drones per night on Ukraine, killing civilians. Where do you think all these drones came from? Iran has established early on in the war, in 2022, a drone factory in Russia. So the same, basically, Shahed drone, the same expanded family of Shahed drones, have been launched against Israeli and Ukrainian civilians. Iran, Hezbollah, Syria, before Assad fell, were launching drones against Israel, also the Houthis, from roughly the same family as the drones Russia has been launching against Ukrainian civilians. And so if you see that Iranian know-how is behind all of these drone attacks, be it in Israel or in Ukraine, you can start seeing how Europe has an interest to counter Iran much more. I would just wish that Europe sees it more and understand Israel's strategic asset to Europe much more and moderate a little bit the whole Palestine festivities in the United Nations or all of these threats and sanctions. I just think our relationship is too, regardless of their sort of political grandstanding, they love showing their domestic front that they're tough on Israel, but they know it does not hold water, and it's time for them to sort of recognize Israel's added value because the threats are common, and they better sort of act toward their own national security interest and sort of living up to ideological grandstanding.
Or Yissachar from the David Institute, thank you so much for joining me and sharing all of this. Thank you to all of our viewers and supporters, and especially those who are sending in questions so we can really get you the information that you want so that you can then be armed and equipped to defend Israel around the globe. So thank you so much to everyone. We will be back with you tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. here in Israel. Until then, stay safe, stay strong. Take care, everyone.